from Romans chapter 4. We're looking at the second half of that chapter today, where Paul is continuing to teach us that we're not saved by our acts of righteousness, but only by our faith in Jesus Christ. But before we get into that, I want to remind you today, let's remember to be in prayer for Diane Bowles. If you remember in the last chapter, Romans chapter 3, Paul really laid it out for us. He didn't hold back in reminding us that we're sinners. We were born in the flesh, and in our flesh, we didn't seek God. We didn't seek to do the things that pleased God. We did what pleased ourselves. And so there's absolute no way that we could stand before the throne and claim that we can be saved because of our own righteousness. Whether we know the law or we don't know the law, we stand condemned. We are sinners. And he follows up in chapter 4, continuing down that same road, this time giving us an example in the Bible hero of Abraham, somebody that nobody could really argue with. And he shows us the fact that Abraham himself didn't try to achieve righteousness in his own actions or in his own eyes. He wasn't righteous. Abraham messed up, just like the rest of us. He did things that were not pleasing to God, and if he was judged on that, he would have been condemned himself. But instead, he was counted righteousness because of his faith, the faith that he had in the promise that God made him. Remember how God promised him a son, and he trusted in that, even though it didn't make sense to his eyes. And through that, God made him a promise that he was going to make him the father of many people. That's us, the father, the children of the promise that have come through Jesus Christ. The thing that really stands out to me about this chapter, though, is just that promise that Abraham believed and how it sort of mirrors the promise that we believe. Think about what Abraham believed, that God was going to give him and his wife a son. And yet he looked at his body, he looked at his wife's body, and realized that neither of them were capable of having a child. It didn't make sense. They were kind of, past that age, and he even uses the phrase as good as dead because there was a barrenness there. And yet he believed in God, the one who was able to bring life out of death, to look at a hopeless situation and bring hope out of that, to create something new. And he just trusted God. I think that's very similar to us today. If we were to look at ourselves, our spiritual bodies for sure, we'd see death. And we see death happening in our physical bodies as well. There's just nothing in us that is able to save ourselves or to bring hope to the hopeless situation that we're in. But when we look to Jesus Christ, we understand he came to redeem us from this hopeless situation and from this death. And in the same way that Abraham trusted in God that he could bring life out of death, we trust in Jesus Christ that he is able to give us eternal life out of the eternal death that we brought ourselves. And one thing that really stood out to me is it's verse 23, where it says, by the words it was counted to him, that God said to Abraham, that was written in that time period. It was accounted to him as righteousness. It wasn't just written to Abraham, but it was written to us. And that in the same way, Abraham would know that it was counted to him as righteousness, that we also would know that when we put our faith in Jesus Christ, it will be counted to us as righteousness. Not righteousness of our deeds or our works, but righteousness of just trusting God and his promises. We become children of Abraham. And so I am thankful for the promises of God that way back when, from the very beginning, when he called Abraham, he wasn't just calling Abraham to make a people for himself in the Jewish people. He was calling Abraham to make a people for himself from all nations. And that promise is about us through Jesus Christ and the Jewish people. Everyone. We are children of Abraham. And God has showed himself faithful through the ages. That promise he made to Abraham, he is fulfilling now. So let's take some time today just to thank God, to worship him for the deepness of salvation and what we see here, and Paul teaching us that we cannot be justified by our actions. Abraham wasn't, and we can't be either. God bless you guys. Have a good day.